everyone. Welcome to our Day in the Life webinar with Mat Leonard as part of Career Days. I'm Brenda Law, the Community Manager for the PyTorch Scholarship Program, and I'm so happy you could join us today. As you know, Mat Leonard as part of Career Days. Sorry. I'm Brenda Law, the Community Manager for the PyTorch Scholarship Program, and I'm so happy you could join us today. As you know, Leonard is part of Career Days. Sorry. Brenda Law. I put my thing on mute, and unfortunately, it went off mute. Okay, where was I? Sorry for that little hiccup, you guys. Okay, as I was saying, Matt was the content developer for our PyTorch Challenge and is also the content developer for the Intro to Deep Learning with PyTorch course. And just a little bit about Matt. Matt is a former physicist, research neuroscientist, and data scientist. Matt did his PhD and postdoctoral at the University of California, Berkeley, here in the Bay Area. And it is a true pleasure for me to introduce Mat Leonard. Welcome, Matt. It's so good to have you here today.
Thanks. Happy to be here. Great. So I think to start out, just kind of introduce myself and tell you a little bit about my current role at Udacity. So as Brenda said, my name is Mat Leonard. I am currently the product lead for Udacity School of AI. So that basically means that I'm overseeing the team that is building a lot of our AI, machine learning, and deep learning programs. As part of my role, I spent a lot of time talking to industry experts, hiring managers, like CEOs, CTOs, about like what skills in AI they're looking for, and trying to translate that into educational programs that we build at Udacity. And I'm also leading our content developers and kind of overseeing all the content. I personally used to be a content developer, so I've been at Udacity for 3 years now. I was hired as a content developer and started making courses around Hadoop and distributed computing, various data science lessons, like talking about Anaconda, Jupyter Notebooks, data visualization. And then was it 2017, January 2017 is when I got involved in the deep learning program. So the deep learning nanodegree program. I was the lead instructor, product lead for that. And then about a year ago is when I started as the overall product lead for the School of AI. And then before that, before I was at Udacity, I did my PhD at UC Berkeley. So I joined the physics program, but then after a couple of years, I decided I didn't really want to do physics anymore. And instead, I wanted to do neuroscience. So I found a nice neuroscience lab to join and spent about 5 years in that lab, and got my PhD in 2014. Cool.
Matt, you mentioned when we were just chatting beforehand, you had an interesting story about applying. Can you share that with the students?
Yeah. So basically, when I got my PhD in 2014, this is when like data science as a field like was really taking off. So there was this sort of movement happening with people getting their PhDs because just the number of faculty positions around the country is just very, very minimal. It's like it's super hard to get a faculty position. So basically all these people with PhDs in STEM fields were going into data science. And so that's what I chose to do. And so basically I wanted to do that at the time because during my studies, I basically taught myself Python, taught myself a bunch of machine learning. I use machine learning in my research, like neural networks and unsupervised learning, a bunch of different machine learning models. And I just really loved writing code, working with Python, working with data, building machine learning models and systems. And so I kind of wanted to translate that into a role. So when I got done with my PhD, I started looking for data science positions, and just over and over and over, it was getting rejected like tons and tons of times. I think in the first round, I probably had 15 either phone interviews or on-site interviews, and I was rejected from all of them. And so after like kind of the 2 months of that, I had to take a postdoc role to continue paying rent and eating. Then after about a year of that, then that's when I got back into interviewing, looking for jobs. And again, like it took another like, I don't know, 10 or 15 tries to actually find a role. And so I found one at Udacity as a content developer, and that's kind of how I ended up here. So I just kind of like wanted to, I like telling this story because even though I had experience like programming in Python, doing machine learning, I had a PhD in physics from UC Berkeley, even with like this background that I have, it still took me a lot of work to actually find a job in industry.
That's good to know. It's perseverance sometimes,
Definitely.
So Matt, we had students pre-submit questions for you, and so let's dive right into them, shall we?
Cool.
Okay. So the first question is from Gauri, and Gauri asks, Matt, what are the basic programming knowledge required to work efficiently in the field of AI or to start a career in the field of AI?
Right. So basic programming knowledge. So there are, in general, like two languages that you need to know really well to work in AI. So the first one is Python, which you all, like at the end of this challenge, you should all be pretty well versed in Python at this point. And the other one is C++. So Python, the reason that Python is so big in AI is because all of this sort of grew out of data science and machine learning, and that has mostly been done in Python over the last 5 or 10 years. And so like TensorFlow and PyTorch kind of grew out of those communities, which and data science kind of made Python blow up over the last decade or so. And then with C++, most of the actual applications and products that people are using that involve machine learning, the production environment itself is written in C++. So if you're interacting, if a user is interacting with some machine learning product, the latency between like what they request and the result they get back has to be really low. So it has to be like super fast. They request something and they get it back. And to accomplish that, your production environment has to be like really fast. And so that's why people use C++. But for the most part, you can actually only be super comfortable with Python. And as you go and interview at companies, for the most part, they're really looking for strong Python skills. And then they pretty much can trust that you'll be able to learn C++ well enough to work with that if you need to. And then, so outside of like the programming languages itself, a lot of it is just sort of your kind of typical, you need to know all the things like functions and variables, like all the basic stuff. Object-oriented programming is really important. And then either PyTorch or TensorFlow, like TensorFlow, Keras. So Keras has been kind of wrapped into TensorFlow. So now Keras and TensorFlow are sort of the same thing. So yeah, either like TensorFlow / Keras or PyTorch if you want to work in the AI field.
Thanks for reviewing that. I think that's going to be super helpful for the students. Okay, second question comes from Ryan. Matt, does your PhD and postdoctoral experience help you on your career? And do you suggest that people who want to get serious in this field get their PhD?
Yeah. So my PhD experience, I think in some ways it does help me, because as I was doing my PhD, it required me to be very self-motivated and self-disciplined. So at the time, is like this really long 5-year project. My advisor, he was around sometimes, but he had a bunch of other students working on a bunch of other projects. So for the most part, it was just kind of me on my own, learning my own things, doing my own things. And I think that's prepared me very well for both a role as a content developer, but also just in AI. Because when you're doing this, to kind of keep up with advancements, you have to really stay on top of papers that are coming out and being able to learn from those papers and like write the code and implement it yourself. So that's like one of the most important skills for you to learn if you're going to like try to get into this field and succeed in it, is being able to take these papers that are being published all the time and reading them, understanding them, being able to explain it to other people, and being able to implement it yourself. So I think that's one thing that I got from a PhD experience that really helped. But that being said, you can learn all that. You can gain those skills without doing a PhD. You literally just need to like start doing it on your own. So with this PyTorch course that you all went through, you are more than set up to start working on projects like these. And so if you actually like want to get serious in this field, getting a PhD is one way to go, but the other way is to just do a whole bunch of different projects on your own. So like finding papers, following people on Twitter, because like the machine learning community lives on Twitter, so you can kind of follow them on Twitter and get a lot of stay up to date with a lot of the new advancements, and just continuously just keep building, learning. So that's the most important part if you actually want to get serious in AI.
That actually ties in nicely with our next question. But first, I have to ask you, what is the name of the machine learning group that you follow on Twitter that you recommend students?
I don't know the name. I do know I wrote an article about it a few months ago, and then we have a list set up on Udacity's Twitter account of a whole bunch of different people in AI and machine learning that you can follow. So I can share that with you, Brenda, and then we can share that with everybody.
Perfect.
Yeah.
I know students be interested in. Okay, so the next question comes from Davina, who asks, what advice do you have for those who do not have a PhD but want to get into this field? And then what sort of extracurricular activities do you recommend? Is Kaggle good to get into?
Yeah. Yes, like I was saying, the most important thing to do is just to work on your own projects. So for example, so one thing we actually teach in the deep learning program, the deep learning nanograph program. So we have one lesson that we have students implement the word-to-vec model. So this is a model for building embedding vectors for words. So it's a way to sort of learn features of different words for use in natural language processing. So we actually have students read the paper and implement it. We do the same thing with another model called deep convolutional GANs. And so again, we have students read the paper and actually implement it. And so that is one of the best ways or best ways to actually deepen your skills, keep learning more. And a very important thing is that when you're doing these projects, you put everything up on GitHub. And it's also really useful when you're doing this to write blog posts. And then, yeah, and so Kaggle is really good for doing these type of projects. So most of the competitions they have, you can typically solve using deep learning or other machine learning techniques. And probably my best advice for this, if you're going to be working on this on your own as extracurricular activities, it's really important to actually try to write blog posts. Set yourself up a blog on Medium, or you can do something like GitHub Pages. But the most important thing is to actually write about what you're learning, because so firstly, trying to explain something that you're learning to somebody else is the best way to learn any topic. Trying to teach somebody else how to do what you're learning is the best. So just the act of writing a blog post and trying to explain what you're learning to somebody else is going to just vastly increase how much you learn and the speed that you learn. And the second reason you want to have a blog and write blog posts is that it basically acts as a portfolio of your projects. And so you can, on your resume, you can link to your blog. Recruiters and hiring managers will look at it, and they'll see your work and that you understand what you're talking about, and see that you can write code. And so yeah, along with Kaggle, so you can do a bunch of Kaggle competitions, and as you're working on those competitions, you can write blog posts about those competitions and put your code up on GitHub. So as far as advice for how to actually get into this, if you don't have a PhD, just work on all the things. Kaggle is a really good place to find these sorts of projects, and then write blog posts, put things up on GitHub.
That's excellent. And to just kind of let students know too, Leah B started a writer's project for new writers of this challenge program. And you guys can find that information in the announcement from yesterday. So if you want to get involved in that. And definitely agree with you, Matt. There's nothing better. There's no better way to learn than by teaching somebody and explaining the content to somebody. Okay, next question is from Kang and asks, should I learn more on machine learning, data science, or deep learning in particular to be able to get better at AI later? or all of them?
Right. Yeah, so I would say, yeah, just learn as much as you possibly can. So kind of the way I do it is if I see something that is interesting to me, then that's kind of like the direction I go in. So one thing I found, at least when I'm working on projects, like the project has to be like personally interesting to me. So for example, I saw this paper, or no, so last weekend I realized like I have done a lot of machine learning stuff, but I haven't actually learned about recommendation engines, like recommendation systems, like how to actually build one, how to train it, and like and all that. And so I was like, okay, this is like something I want to learn about. And so then I started kind of looking up online, like how recommendation systems are actually built. And then I found a few papers, and one in particular called probability matrix factorization. So this paper was really interesting to me because it combined Bayesian statistics and Bayesian data analysis along with machine learning and deep learning approaches. And so it kind of like took all these interests that I had at the moment and combined them into one thing. And so it was a perfect project for me. So and as far as like different fields, there's all these projects in different things. So there could be some like data science project, specifically about statistics that's interesting to you. So kind of go that way. And then like machine learning is a very broad field. So there's a lot of different things in there. Like if you don't know about unsupervised learning, like you haven't learned about k-means or Gaussian mixture models yet, you can find like some interesting project to do that will help you learn that stuff. And then if there are different models of supervised learning like SVMs, random forests, maybe autoencoders, autoregression. So there's like just tons and tons of different algorithms out there that are used in different cases with different data sets, basically. So just I guess like try to be as broad as you can in the field, but at the same time, go where your interests lead you, because that's going to be lead you to your most successful projects.
Excellent advice. Okay, the next question, Matt, comes from Ben, who asks, what is the most challenging part of the work when developing a deep learning model?
Right. So for me, I've actually found that developing the model itself, so when you're in TensorFlow or PyTorch and actually kind of setting up the layers in your network and like how they're all connected, like actually writing the code to implement your model is one of the easier parts of deep learning. So pretty much the first difficult part is actually finding a data set. So this is the main bottleneck that most companies and businesses and industry actually face, is that they don't have the right data set for their deep learning, machine learning systems. And so, and when you're learning as well, there's actually a few kind of industry or research standard academic type data sets, but it's really hard to find data sets that are similar to what you would actually use in an actual company. So that is like one of the most challenging parts of deep learning, is actually having a good data set to use. Secondly, is all the code that you need to write to get your data set actually into the model. So for example, when you are using or when you are doing like a natural language processing problem, you have to write a bunch of code to actually load in your text and then kind of parse it, process it, do things like tokenization, where you're splitting up the individual words into or into sentences into individual words, and then doing things like removing stop words like the, and, if, a lot of these little words. So there's just like a whole set of different things that you actually have to write code for to actually get your data into your model. So and that's what I personally have had like the most time spent on, is like once I have a data set, then actually writing the code to get the data loaded and into the deep learning model itself.
Okay, next question, Matt. This one comes from Munasir, and I think I've heard this question a lot. And it's, do you have any career suggestions or tips from somebody who's transitioning from a tech support background or even a non-tech background and doesn't have the prior research experience to the field of AI?
Right. So switching careers to AI, from what I've seen, most places are looking for people who have 1 or 2 years of experience working in AI. So what I mean by experience is not necessarily like job experience. So, you don't have to have an actual job in an AI field for 2 years to get a job in AI, because that doesn't make sense. But what it really means with experience is that you've taken a year or 2 of your personal time outside of your normal job and actually like done these projects. And so, like I was talking about before, if you're doing these projects either on Kaggle or just finding papers to implement, putting them on GitHub, writing blog posts, then you're going to have this like really nice portfolio over a year or 2 of like your actual work. So, and then at that point, like once you actually have about probably like a year or 2 of experience building these things, then at that point you can probably start to try actually like applying. And so this is assuming that you don't actually have kind of like a hardcore software engineer background. So if you already are a software engineer, you can kind of take a shortcut. So if you have experience like writing code, building products, shipping it to production, you can probably get by with like 6 months of experience actually doing machine learning or deep learning. So I know there are other, but that being said, I know there are other people like me who had a really hard time finding jobs in this area, even though they were experienced software developers. So again, like one time I saw this video, this guy was a software developer, and he was just saying like, oh, like I've applied to like 15 different roles and I've been rejected from everything, right? And he had 10 years of software development experience, and it was still difficult for him to find a job. So just to, like put that out there, like even though you can have like certain backgrounds, it's just very, in general, pretty difficult to actually find jobs in these fields. But yeah, so that being said, once you once you do feel like you've had enough experience, so I'd say after like a year, year and a half, 2 years, something like that, then you can start reaching out. And most of the time, these positions are going to really test your software development skills and software engineering skills. And so they're going to give you these like coding interviews. And so for that, I would suggest looking up this book, Cracking the Coding Interview. So it's a very good resource for practicing the types of questions that you're going to see in these engineering, these engineering roles. And then also learning how machine learning systems are actually built in industry. And from what I've heard from recruiters and hiring managers is that a lot of times, like once you get past the initial phone calls, like they really want you to succeed. And so they will give you just tons and tons of prep before your actual interview. And so when you're applying to most companies, big companies, they really want to help you out. And so as you start applying, then they're going to be giving you resources as well. But it's really all about like practice and preparation and just hard work and doing a bunch of projects.
That's really great career advice. Thank you, Matt. I'm gonna skip ahead a little bit and take this question from Adam, who asks, assuming you want to hire a developer, what would distinguish that developer from others?
Yeah. So so like I was saying, when you're hiring developers, a lot of times, you're doing these sort of software engineer kind of coding problems. They tend to be somewhat short and not necessarily exactly what you would be doing in your actual job. But they do a really good job of kind of testing if your candidate is a good coder, is able to think in a way that's logical, and get from your problem to a solution in a reasonable amount of time. So those are really nice. The other big thing is actually what some people call soft skills, but I just call them skills. Like being personable, right, and having empathy and being respectful for the people that you work with. So that's like one of the like biggest skills that you can actually have as a developer is just being able to work with other people. Because in the role as a developer, you're on a team, and the people on your team are reviewing your code, you're reviewing their code, and you're all working together and like having conversations, trying to figure out the best solutions. And so just being able to like actually talk with people, converse with them, having empathy for their problems and empathy for them as a person is going to get you a long way in like just kind of distinguishing yourself as a person and as a developer.
I'm actually super glad you mentioned that. We had a webinar a few months ago with developers from a developer agency, and they said that one of the biggest misconceptions is that they work just by themselves, like just them and the computer all day. And they said that's not it. It's so much teamwork. It's so much code review. It's so much sharing back and forth, and you really do need those kind of soft skills, like you said.
Yeah.
Speaking of soft skills, we are hosting a interactive networking session, you guys, tomorrow from 11 to noon, and really hope that you'll join that because that will help refine those soft skills that Matt's referring to. Okay, next question. Let's see. Let's go to you, Matt, in your story. Thiago asks, how long did you take to get your first position? And kind of in conjunction with that, how did you kind of keep that that confidence level up during that time?
Yeah. So my first position, my first position out of academia was at Udacity. So it was 3 years ago when I got a role as a content developer. So yeah, like I was saying before, I kind of did it in 2 rounds. So the first round was like right after I graduated, and I spent the summer just applying to as many places as I could get. It is actually an interesting experience because the very first interviews I did, it had been literally 12 years since I had actually applied for a job, right? Because like I did my undergrad and then I did grad school, right? And so like in between there, I didn't actually have a job outside of academia. So when I first started applying for jobs and doing interviews, I was just horrible. Like it's just the worst. But as I did more and more interviews, I actually got more comfortable, and I kind of understood better about how interviews or what the typical questions were, like how I was supposed to be like answering, I guess. And just so I just knew better what to expect and how to answer questions. And at the same time, I was learning from my failures. So when I was doing these interviews and I was asked a question that I didn't know, I would go home and I would study and I would learn like how to answer that question that I didn't know. So the truth is like you're almost always going to get rejected from any job you apply for. That's just kind of how it works. But when you're rejected, it's really important to try to get feedback from whoever's interviewing you about what you can do to improve, and then also take note of where you think you can improve, and just really try to focus on that and like learning from your mistakes. And then yeah, so that was like kind of the first round of like interviews I did. And then I kind of took a year off to do this postdoc role, and then after about a year, I started applying for jobs again. So that time, during that year when I was doing my postdoc, I actually started writing a bunch of blog posts about different data science things. So I started doing data science projects on my own and writing a bunch of blog posts. And so kind of preparing myself over this year when I was doing my postdoc to be better prepared to actually do these interviews when I was ready again. So then in my kind of second round of looking for data science roles, I found a role much faster than in the first one, and I was getting more and more on-site interviews. So when I first started, it was rare that I ever got past like phone interviews. But then after a bit, as I got better and better at interviewing, I would more likely get past the phone interview to on-site interviews. And then eventually I got past the on-site interview, was like hired full time.
Yeah, I really feel that interviewing in itself is a skill.
Yeah. Yeah. And so actually, it's like there are a lot of resources out there that will do mock interviews for you. So one I know that is very popular right now is called LeetCode. So LEET code.com. And so I think they charge a little bit for it, but they will basically provide mock interviews for you. which is like super helpful. It's really important to actually like practice interviews before you do the real thing.
That's really a good resource. Thank you for sharing that with the students. Okay, this next question from Aishish, and they ask, what are the things that we should do to move our knowledge to the next level?
Yeah. So yeah, like I was saying before, it's really important, and I try to stress this a lot, but it's really important to keep doing projects. So after you're done with this course, I just keep finding things to work in machine learning and deep learning. Keep writing code, like just never stop. Because the thing is, like as soon as you stop writing code, as soon as you stop using PyTorch, as soon as you stop using Python, your skills are going to get rusty, right? And so to actually kind of keep going, keep the momentum, like just find some other resources. So like I was saying before, you can find like papers online. You can look at like different, so a good place to look is actually GitHub. You can find a lot of different implementations of deep learning and machine learning models on GitHub, and you can try to take that and extend it or just re-implement it yourself. So as far as like keep moving your knowledge to the next level, it just takes a lot of work of continuing to build your own projects and learning more things and implementing as much code as you can.
Good. All right, this is a 4-part question from Sangor, and they ask, which DL frameworks do you use on a day-to-day basis? Is there a framework that you use for most things, or do you find that every framework is good at a specific thing? Do you use PyTorch? And last, as a professional, do you think that PyTorch is or will be a popular framework?
Yeah. So this is a really exciting question for me because I do use PyTorch, and I love PyTorch just as a developer myself. It's just wonderful to use. It's just compared to the other deep learning frameworks out there, it's really nice. So yeah, so which DL deep learning frameworks do I use on a day-to-day basis? Like 100% PyTorch, absolutely. So that being said, so TensorFlow, so kind of the difference between TensorFlow and PyTorch historically is that TensorFlow is a framework where you develop a static graph. So basically that means that you kind of define all of your operations beforehand, like how they connect to each other. And then when you're ready to actually process your data, you kind of pass it through this graph. And what this does is when you're writing the code to build your graph, to define your graph, you're writing code in a way that you typically don't in Python. So when you normally write in Python, it's called Pythonic. And the thing about TensorFlow is that you have to work in a different mental model as you would from normal kind of procedural code. And the thing about PyTorch is that it is built specifically to be procedural and work the same way that NumPy works. And what this means is that if you are an experienced Python developer, it's really straightforward and simple to develop in PyTorch. But there's a pretty large cognitive disconnect when you're working with TensorFlow if you're experienced in Python. However, what's really cool is that now that Keras is being kind of wrapped into TensorFlow, they're making this really interesting change in the API for TensorFlow. So they've added this mode called eager execution. So this makes it more similar to PyTorch, where when you actually write your code, you can execute it right away and then get output from these individual layers that you're using. So kind of the same way that PyTorch does. And then Keras provides like a really nice API for defining your networks and your models. So now TensorFlow, and specifically TensorFlow 2.0, which I believe is being released sometime later this year, should be much more similar to PyTorch in that the way that you're actually writing your TensorFlow code is more Pythonic and more similar to NumPy. And so you won't have as much of this kind of cognitive disconnect. So as far as what do I think about PyTorch, will it be a popular framework? So I was actually looking at this the other day. If you look at Google Trends, so you can kind of go to Google Trends and you type in like PyTorch and TensorFlow and Keras, you'll actually see that PyTorch has basically gained, according to Google Trends, as much popularity as Keras, and it's growing like really quickly and catching up to TensorFlow. So I think probably by the end of 2019, I think PyTorch and TensorFlow will be roughly on the same level, like popularity-wise. Like, so how much, like how many people are using either framework. So, and based on people I've talked to over at Google and Facebook, pretty much everybody is thinking at this point that there's going to be just kind of two main frameworks, TensorFlow and PyTorch. So yeah, so I think over the next year, you're going to be seeing a lot of people switch from TensorFlow to PyTorch, and new people will probably be picking up PyTorch.
Interesting. I love how you were like looking it up on Google Trends.
Yeah.
All right, we have one last student question, and then I thought, Matt, if you're willing, we can see if there are any questions in chat.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so this last question comes from Beata, and Beata asks, what are the hottest AI-related positions right now? How should we present or show our work so that we could be recognized by companies? And should we put our projects on GitHub and share every place that we can?
Yeah. So the hottest AI-related positions right now. So most of them, you're actually not going to see very many positions that are labeled as AI. You're not going to see like AI engineer. It's for the most part going to be machine learning engineers or like software developer, machine learning. So those are the different roles you're going to actually be seeing in job descriptions. And then what they're actually doing, like these positions, a lot of times it's kind of low-hanging fruit, I would say. So one of the biggest things that are happening right now is people developing natural language processing systems to help out with customer support. So the way this works is that users will either call or write into customer support, and then the AI system is going to kind of try to understand what they're asking, and then find an appropriate document to send to the internal customer support people so they can help the user. So it's kind of this loop where there's an AI system in between the user and the customer support person, and it just kind of like helps out this whole system. So that is like one of the big things that's going on right now in AI, like across enterprise, across industry. You're seeing just a bunch of these kind of systems that are kind of AI-assisted customer support. There's also a lot of roles around computer vision. So like pretty much every online website that is a storefront that is dealing with products of images, they are doing some sort of classification with the actual images that they are presenting to customers and users. So and there's just like tons and tons and tons of images online. And there's things like satellite images are being used for different purposes. Like, for example, you can, like farmers are using satellite imagery to kind of monitor their different fields and their crops. And yeah, and just like healthcare, like livestock, agriculture, like all industries are kind of being affected by AI and machine learning right now. But the kind of corollary of this is, like I was saying before, like one of the biggest difficulties in AI, machine learning, deep learning is actually finding good data sets and dealing with kind of the massive amounts of data. So the other side of this is that there's a lot of work and emphasis being done on the data engineering side. So building the pipelines for actually collecting the data, annotating it, labeling it, doing any processing that you need to do, and getting it into a good state that it can then be fed into your machine learning systems. So that's kind of the other way to go with the software kind of part of AI. Yeah, and then so the other question, so like how should we present, show our work so we can be recognized by companies? Yes, like I was saying before, like blogs are really important. Writing blog posts, put all of your code up on GitHub, and make sure it's presentable and that you are following good programming practices. For example, in Python, there is a standard called PEP8. So basically says stuff like, oh, your line should be roughly less than 80 characters and these sort of things. So you want to follow like programming best practices. is you want to really show off your skills to your employees. So like when you put stuff up on GitHub, like make sure it actually looks nice and things are commented and that sort of thing.
Fabulous. Okay, Matt, I'm looking through. Let's take just a few student questions. One of them is from Mohammed, and he's asking, what are some of the best books you recommend about deep learning and machine learning? Or do you have any favorite sites that you use to keep up to date and stay informed?
Yeah, to stay informed. Yeah, so like I was saying before, Twitter is actually probably the best place to stay informed. And like I said before, like Brenda and I will share this blog post I wrote earlier about like who to follow, so you can get in on that as well. Because because the machine learning community basically exists on Twitter, so there a lot of times they will share new interesting papers, new blog posts, so you can read that sort of thing. There's also a really good site called distill.pub. So I think it's DISTIL, 2 L's, DISTILL.pub. So they make a lot of just amazing interactive articles about deep learning. So it's a great resource to understand more about deep learning, machine learning. Great place to go. As far as books, so there was a deep learning book written by Ian Goodfellow and Joshua Bengio. So that one it's very, I would say it's like very technical and a lot of math, but it's kind of like the deep learning textbook right now, if you're looking for like a textbook. There's also a book called Grokking Deep Learning that was written by Andrew Trask. So that's more of a kind of an easier way to get into deep learning. And specifically, he wrote it so you don't necessarily need to know like calculus. So like the other books, the Ian Goodfellow book, you have to be pretty strong in calculus. But for Grokking deep learning, you can kind of go into it if you only know algebra, then you'll still be able to get as much out of it as you can. And then Francois Chollet, who is the creator of Keras, he actually wrote a couple books on deep learning as well. So those are good resources too.
Thank you, Matt. What we can do too is I'll talk to Matt and we can get these resources Matt mentioned up on the PyTorch Challenge site for you guys.
Yeah.
Scrambling to look these up and write them down. Matt, I think that what I saw in the pre-submitted questions, which kind of seeing a little bit here, is can you describe a little bit about the differences between machine learning and data scientists' role, and just kind of help clarify them for
everyone? So it's really interesting. So the way these sort of machine learning product teams work now is that in general there'll be at least one data scientist, and there'll be at least one machine learning engineer, then with a product manager that's kind of leading the team. So the idea is that the data scientist is the person who kind of takes the business problem that's defined by the product manager, and then does research and exploration on like what are the features, like, so first, like, what's my data, how do we get this data, like, is it labeled, if it's not labeled, like, how do we label it, what labels are we going to use, and then they take that data and they try to figure out like what's the best machine learning or deep learning model that we can use. So a lot of that is very research oriented, a lot of exploration, and just a lot of like writing code in Jupyter notebooks, right? So a lot of exploration and trying a bunch of different things. And so then once the data scientist finds what they consider to be like the appropriate model, then they kind of hand that off over to the machine learning engineer. And what the machine learning engineer does is they built this pipeline that is like taking the data from the database or S3 or wherever the data is stored, and like building the data pipeline, the processing part of that, and then into the machine learning model that is in some production environment, and then eventually like writing the code that actually gets put up on the website. So these machine learning systems, like, they have some input, and then their output is typically a REST API. So kind of the way that like websites work is that you make a request to some URL, and the way it works with machine learning systems is the same way. You make a request to some URL, you pass in your data to this URL, this API endpoint, and then it will return some prediction for you. And then typically there will be like a front-end engineer who will be able to take this prediction and display it in a website. So kind of the difference between data scientists and machine learning engineers is that the data scientists do the first part where they're exploring, trying to figure out what the best model is. And then the machine learning engineer takes that model and kind of builds the pipeline, the production system that's going to be used in the product.
Thank you for explaining that. I think that helps clear things up.
Yeah.
Before we go, I just wanted to ask you any final career tips, interviewing tips that you can share with our students as they begin this journey.
Yeah. So let me think. I think I've pretty much, I've covered like most of my advice. So, the biggest advice is like, just keep working on this, and be persistent and like do your best to not give up. And like I said before, like you are going to get rejected a bunch of times. Like I've been rejected a bunch of times. Like everybody who like has been trying to get these jobs has been rejected a bunch of times. And so just take those rejections as learning opportunities and figure out like where you can get better, like where you can grow, and just like keep working like hard, like don't give up, and just keep working on projects, write blog posts, get your code up on GitHub. Another good thing you can do, I was just talking with somebody over at Facebook on the PyTorch team. He was saying that they find a lot of good candidates through their work on open source projects. So one thing you can do on GitHub is if you're working on open source projects, it really shows off your skills in collaboration. And like we were talking about before, like the soft skills where you're able to actually work with people. So that is extremely important for these type of roles. So if you're able to contribute to open source projects, either like TensorFlow, Keras, NumPy, Matplotlib, other Python things, and actually show that you can work and you can code, you can make pull requests and they're accepted, then that's a really good signal to recruiters and hiring managers that you're an excellent candidate.
Fabulous advice. Matt, this has been such a treat for us to have you here as creator of the PyTorch Challenge course. Thank you so much. Students have said, I don't know if you can check out the Grateful channel, but what they've said that they've learned in this short time span is just immeasurable, and they're so grateful to you. We are so grateful to you. Thank you again for your time today.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, everybody, have a great day, and we'll see you in Slack. Bye.